The letter had come through an agent in York, no name attached to the household, only a description of the position. Reader and companion for a gentleman in seclusion. And a wage so far above what the work seemed to require that Imogen had read it twice, certain there was a mistake in the printing. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in a house that is trying very hard to be forgotten. Not empty, not dead, just quiet, on purpose. Ashcombe was that kind of house. Imogen Carey arrived at its gates on a Tuesday in October, with one trunk, one letter of employment, and exactly 4 shillings sewn into the hem of her cloak, because a woman travelling alone learns early never to carry her money where a hand can find it. There was no mistake. She would understand that later. The housekeeper, a broad, watchful woman named Mrs. Pruitt, met her at the door with a candle and a list of rules so specific they might have been carved in stone somewhere and merely copied down for her benefit. You'll read to him of an evening, 7 o'clock, not before, not after. Mrs. Pruitt's eyes did not blink often. You'll sit at the screen in the study. There, that one, the tall one with the birds painted on it, and you will not come round it, not for any reason. He'll ring if he wants the candle moved. You'll bring 1 candle, never 2. And if I have a question for him, ma'am, you'll ask it to the screen. A pause, weighted with something Imogen could not name yet. And you will never ask his name beyond what you're given. He is Mr. Vane in this house. That is the whole of what you need. Imogen nodded, because 4 shillings does not argue with a housekeeper. That evening, at 7 exactly, she sat where she was told, on a low chair before a painted screen taller than she was, its birds mid-flight in gold leaf gone soft with age, and she opened the book she'd been handed. Some Cowper, if you please, the task will do. And she read into the dark on the other side of it. She did not see him, not his face, not his shape, not so much as the shadow of him against the firelight. There was only his voice, when at last it came. "Slower," he said. "You read as though the words are trying to escape you." It was a low voice, rough at the edges, the way a voice gets when it isn't used often enough to wear smooth, and there was something in it, some catch, some particular low turn on the vowels, that made Imogen's hand still on the page for exactly 1/2 of 1 second. She did not know why. She told herself it was nothing. A voice was a voice. She had heard 100 low voices in her life, and most of them had belonged to men who wanted something from her. Her silence, her gratitude, her hand in marriage to settle a debt that was never hers to begin with. This was only a stranger behind a screen, asking her to read slower. She read slower. Afterward, alone in the small room she'd been given in the East Passage, plain, clean, with a window that looked out over a garden gone to seed, she sat on the edge of the bed and did the thing she always did at the end of a long day. She peeled off her right glove, finger by finger, and looked at what was underneath. The scar ran from the base of her thumb to the inside of her wrist, pale and puckered, old enough now that it no longer hurt, only itched. Sometimes, on cold nights, the way old things do when the weather turns, she had worn a glove over it for 14 years, not from shame exactly, from habit, from the particular exhaustion of being asked about it by people who thought they were owed the story, simply because they'd noticed the shape of it. She pulled the glove back on before she blew out the candle. Some doors, once you've learned to close them, close themselves. She did not think of the fire that night, not really, not on purpose. She had trained herself, over 14 years, not to. But somewhere underneath the sleep that finally took her, a small, persistent voice, his voice, rough at the edges, kept turning over and over, like a coin someone had dropped in the dark, that she could hear falling but not yet find. It was not the first strange household Imogen had worked in, and she suspected, with the particular flat certainty of a woman who has run out of better options twice already, that it would not be the last. Her father had been a country solicitor, well-liked, poorly paid, and hopelessly generous with money that was never quite his to give away. When he died, 3 years past, he left behind a widow with a weak chest, a debt that swallowed the house whole within the 12-month, and a daughter who had learned, very young, that gentility and solvency were two entirely different inheritances, and a person might easily be born to one and denied the other. She had gone first as a governess in a house full of children who did not want teaching and a mistress who did not want her opinions. She had gone next as a companion to an elderly aunt in Harrogate who died within the year and left Imogen precisely nothing, which had seemed, at the time, a fitting enough epitaph for the whole arrangement. And now she had come to Ashcombe, to a house that would not give its own name to a stranger at the gate, for a wage too large and a set of rules too strange, and she told herself, climbing the stairs that first night with her single candle, that she had long since stopped expecting an employer to make sense, only to pay on time. She did not yet know how wrong and how right both halves of that expectation would turn out to be. By the second week, the reading had become something else, not quite a friendship. Imogen would not have called it that, not yet, but a kind of architecture. A structure they were building together, brick by careful brick, out of Cowper and Gibbon, and once, scandalously, a smuggled volume of Tristram Shandy. That made the voice behind the screen laugh, actually laugh, a short, surprised bark of a sound, as though laughter itself were a language he'd half forgotten how to speak. "You have opinions," he said one evening, when she'd paused mid-sentence to observe, unbidden, that she thought the author a coward for never simply finishing his own sentences. "I have very few luxuries left to me, sir. Opinions are free." A silence, thoughtful rather than offended. "Keep them then. God knows this house could use a few free things in it." It was around this time she began to notice the household's other weather system, the one that moved through it like a low-pressure front, invisible until it broke. Mr. Fenwick, the family solicitor, came twice that fortnight, each time more grey about the mouth than the last, each time closeted with Mr. Vane for an hour behind a locked door, each time leaving without so much as a word to the servants, his hat clutched too tightly in both hands. Mrs. Pruitt would not discuss it, but Imogen was not without ears, and a house trying to keep a secret makes more noise doing it than it thinks. The old Duke's will. That much she gathered, piecing it from half-sentences over the mending basket. A codicil, added late, in the final year of the father's life. Cruel, some of the tenants called it, though none dared say so where the family might hear. The son was to present himself, in person, before the assembled trustees and tenantry, unveiled, on the day he turned 30, or the title, the land, all 4,000 acres of it, would pass instead to a cousin. 30. Imogen did the arithmetic without quite meaning to, the way one does with numbers that matter more than they should. Whatever day that was, it was coming soon. Weeks, not months. She met the cousin only once, and once was more than enough. Mr. Aldous Vane arrived unannounced on a bright, hard morning, all polished boots and polished teeth, and stood in the entrance hall speaking to Mrs. Pruitt in a voice pitched deliberately to Carrie. "Do give my regards to my cousin," he said, smiling in a way that did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "Tell him I think of him constantly. I think of him every day. It would ease my mind so very much to see him, to know he is, well." The pause before "well" had teeth in it. One does hear such things in the village, such sad, strange things. A man can hardly be blamed for worrying after his own blood. He left without waiting for an answer, and the hall felt colder for a full hour after the door shut behind him. Imogen found Mrs. Pruitt afterward in the linen room, refolding sheets that did not need refolding, her jaw set hard enough to crack walnuts. "He is not to be believed," Imogen said carefully, because she had learned that the housekeeper's silences generally invited a little coaxing and rewarded it. "He is the most dangerous man in 3 counties, Miss Carey, and he does it all with a smile and a good tailor, which is worse, if you ask me, than doing it with a pistol." Mrs. Pruitt did not look up from the sheets. "His Grace's own father favoured that one, you know. Aldous used to say he had spirit. Well, he has spirit enough to make a man's own tenants doubt whether their master is even living, and to smile the whole while he does it, and I'll thank you not to repeat that I said so, but there it is. And Mr. Vane," Imogen caught herself, too late on the word, "His Grace," which she had not been given leave to use, and which had arrived in her mouth unbidden, the way true things sometimes do before permission catches up to them. "Mr. Vane knows all this." "Mr. Vane," said Mrs. Pruitt, with a weight on the name that made it clear she had noticed the slip and chosen, for once, to let it pass, "knows a great deal more than he says, and says a great deal less than he ought, and if you'll take an old woman's advice, miss, you'll go on reading to him of an evening and asking him nothing at all, because the asking has never once worked, not in 5 years, and I begin to think it never will." That evening, reading, Imogen's eyes fell. She did not mean them to. It simply happened, the way the eye catches on any small bright object in a dim room, on something resting on the low table beside the screen, a child's toy. Wooden, hand-carved, the paint long since worn away, a weather vane no bigger than her palm, shaped like a running fox, one ear chipped clean off. Something in her chest went very still. She had seen that fox before. She was almost certain of it. On the roof of a dovecote, once, turning slowly in a wind that smelled of hay and August, but the thought arrived without an ending, the way a door opens onto a room already dark, and she shut it again before she could see what was inside. "You've stopped reading," the voice said, from behind the screen. "Forgive me, sir." She found her place again. Her hand, she noticed, had gone to her right wrist, pressing lightly against the glove there, though she could not have said why. "I was only admiring your fox." A long pause, longer than the sentence warranted. "It was a gift," he said finally, and something in his voice had changed, gone careful, gone quiet, the way a man's voice goes when he is standing very near the edge of something he does not intend to fall into tonight. A long time ago, from someone I no longer, from someone. He did not finish it. Imogen did not ask him to, but she read the rest of that evening's chapter with her heart beating harder than the words on the page had any right to cause, and she did not understand why, and she was, for the first time since she'd arrived at Ashcombe, a little afraid of an answer she had not yet let herself ask the question for. The storm came in off the moors on a Thursday, without warning, the way the worst ones always do. No gathering clouds, no polite overture of wind, just a sky that went from grey to black in the space of an hour, and then simply opened. By 7, the rain was coming sideways against the windows, and by past, every candle in the east wing had guttered out at once in a draught that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, and Imogen found herself sitting in the study in absolute, total dark, her book useless in her lap, listening to the storm try to take the roof off over both their heads. "Don't move," the voice said, from behind the screen, the first words either of them had spoken in several minutes. "There's glass on the floor somewhere near the hearth. Bates dropped a lamp an hour past, and no one swept it." "I wasn't planning to move, sir. I find I'm rather comfortable being blind for once. It's restful, nothing to look at that might disappoint me." She heard him go still. "That's a strange thing to say. Is it?" She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, spoke to the dark rather than to the screen, because in this particular dark, the screen no longer felt like it was doing anything at all. "I find people are so very interested in what a person looks like, sir, far more interested than in what they are. I've always thought it a poor trade, face for character. We'd all do better business the other way round." The silence that followed was different from his other silences, longer, rounder somehow, the silence of a man turning something over very carefully, checking it for a trap before he touched it. "There was a fire," he said at last, quietly, into the dark, where it was safe to say such things, because the dark asks nothing back. "When I was a boy, I won't tell you the whole of it, but I lost something in it. Not a breath, ragged at the edges, not a person, not that I know of, God willing, but something, my face, part of it, my father's regard, the whole of it. That was the worst loss, if I'm honest, though I've never said so aloud before tonight, and I don't entirely know why I'm saying it now, except that I can't see you, and you can't see me, and there is something in that arrangement that makes the truth feel almost survivable." Imogen's hand, in the dark, found her own right wrist and gripped it, hard, through the glove, as though she could hold something in by holding on to herself. "He sent me away," the voice went on, rougher now. "My father told the physicians to keep me at Bath for my health, and told the county I was touring the continent for my education." And what he meant, what he never once had the honesty to say plainly, was, "I cannot look at you, and so you will go where I do not have to." A short, terrible laugh, with no humor anywhere inside it. "I had a friend before, a child like I was. I've wondered, now and again, whether they ever wondered what became of me, whether they were told I'd died, or simply forgot, the way children do forget, when a person simply stops appearing." Imogen did not speak. She could not have spoken. Her throat had closed around something too large and too old to name, and in the utter blackness of that room, with the storm screaming outside and the fire long since drowned in its own hearth, She felt the very last brick of some wall she had built at 9 years old. I will never speak of it. I will never be looked at like that again. Not ever. Not by anyone. Begin, very quietly, to crack. She did not say what she wanted to say, not that night. May I ask you something, sir? She said, into the dark, once she trusted her own voice again. You may ask. I do not promise an answer. Do you hate him for it, your father? The silence stretched long enough that she thought perhaps she had asked one question too many and had begun composing an apology when he answered. I did. For a long time, I hated him with a completeness that frightened me. I used to lie awake as a young man composing the speech I would give him, the one that would finally make him see me and understand what he had done. I never gave it. He died before I found the courage, and I have had 5 years since to discover that a speech given to an empty chair satisfies nothing at all. A breath, unsteady. I think now it was not entirely cruelty. I think he was ashamed, not of me, though it took me a decade to untangle the two, ashamed of his own inability to look at what had happened and simply love me through it. Weak men so often disguise their weakness as principle, Miss Carey. It is easier to call a thing for the good of the family name than to admit one has simply flinched and gone on flinching for want of the courage to stop. That is a very generous accounting of a man who sent his own son away. It is the only accounting I can make that lets me sleep at night, he said, and there was, for the first time, something almost like a smile in it, worn thin and hard-won. You'll find, I think, that most of the peace a person makes with a parent is simply a story they've agreed to believe, because the true one is unbearable to carry every day. She told herself, later, lying awake with the storm still muttering itself out over the moor, that it was because she could not be certain, that a voice was, after all, only a voice, and a wooden fox was only a wooden fox, and there were 1,000 burned children in England, and no doubt 100 fathers cruel enough to hide them. That was what she told herself. It was not, entirely, the truth. The deadline arrived the way deadlines always do, slowly, and then all at once. Mr. Fenwick came again on a Monday, and this time he did not leave quietly. Imogen, crossing the hall with an armful of linen, heard the study door fly open, and the solicitor's voice, no longer careful, no longer grey and polite, but cracked wide open with something close to panic. 3 weeks, Your Grace. 3. Your cousin has already written to 2 members of the board requesting a commission of lunacy. God forgive him, on the grounds that a man who will not show his own face to his own tenants can hardly be trusted to manage 4,000 acres of them. I have held him off with paper and delay for as long as paper and delay will serve. But paper does not stand up in front of the Lord Chancellor's men, sir, and neither, I am sorry to say, does delay. Then let him have it. The voice from within was low and very tired. Let him have all of it. I find I no longer, you do not mean that, Fenwick, merely shouting now. Your father was a great many things, Your Grace, not all of them kind, God rest him, but he built this. Your grandfather built it before him. 400 families draw their bread from this land, and you would hand the whole of it to a man who has spent 5 years poisoning the county against you, rather than simply stand in a room for 1/2 of 1 hour and let people see that you are their duke, and you are alive? The door shut, hard. Imogen did not see Edmund Vane that evening at 7. Mrs. Pruitt came instead, tight-lipped, to say that Mr. Vane sent his apologies. He was indisposed. The reading would not be required. It was not required the next evening either, nor the one after that. On the 4th evening, Imogen did something she had never once done in 3 months at Ashcombe. She did not wait to be summoned. She walked to the study door herself, knocked twice as she'd been taught, and when no answer came, she opened it anyway. The room was dark, no candle at all, not even the one, and from behind the screen, a voice she barely recognized, stripped of all its dry, careful humor, said only, "Go away, Miss Carey." No. A pause. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "No, sir." Her heart was going like a bird against a window pane, but her voice, when it came, was steadier than she had any right to expect. "You may dismiss me if you like. You are within your rights, and I have 4 shillings and a trunk, and I have managed on less before, but I will not simply go away. Because you have decided, in the dark, alone, that the entire county's opinion of your face is worth more than the 400 families you were just now shouting about defending. You were listening at the door. I was carrying linen past it, loudly, sir, and slowly. Anyone might have heard. Something that was almost a laugh and almost a sob came from behind the screen and did not resolve into either. You don't understand, he said, and now the words came fast, tumbling, years of them, as though a lock somewhere had finally given. You have not seen it. No one has seen it. Not fully. Not in 5 years. Not since my own father looked at me across a breakfast table and could not finish his tea. You sit behind that screen every evening being kind to a voice, Miss Carey, and it is the kindest thing anyone has done for me since I was 9 years old, and I am terrified. Do you understand me? Terrified that the moment you see the rest of me, the voice will stop being enough. Imogen stood very still in the doorway, in the dark, and felt 14 years of her own locked door strain against its hinges. She did not open it, not that night. But she took one step further into the room than she had ever been permitted, and she said, quietly, "I think you have been waiting 5 years for someone to prove you right. I am not going to be that someone, Your Grace. Whatever else happens between now and your birthday, I am not going to be that." It was the first time she had called him Your Grace. Neither of them remarked on it, but something shifted in the room's silence after, some current, reversing itself, quiet as a tide turning in the dark. She told him 3 days before his birthday, and she told him with her glove off. She had not planned it that way. She had, if she was honest, not planned it at all, had simply walked into the study that evening, sat in her low chair before the painted screen with its gold birds forever mid-flight, and found that the words which had been building in her for a fortnight, for a lifetime, would simply no longer stay behind her teeth. "I am not going to read tonight," she said. "I have something else to say instead, and I would ask that you not interrupt me, because if you interrupt me, I do not think I will find the courage to finish." Silence from behind the screen, waiting. "When I was 9 years old," Imogen said, "there was a fire in a dovecote, on the edge of an estate in Cumberland, where my family had gone to stay with friends for the summer. A boy I knew, my dearest friend in all the world, though I would not have called him that then. We were too young for such grand words. had smuggled a candle in to show me a nest of fox kits he'd found sheltering there. The candle fell. I do not remember how. I have spent 14 years trying not to remember how. She heard him go very, very still. He put himself between me and the worst of it. I have never been certain in all these years whether he meant to, or whether it simply happened that way, the way brave things sometimes simply happen, without anyone deciding them first. I got this. She held up her bare right hand, though he could not see it, could not see anything but a screen, gold birds, a lamp burning low. She held it up anyway, because she needed to see it in that moment more than he did. He got a great deal more than this. And then, within the month, he was simply gone. No word, no letter. His family closed their house and left, and mine was told nothing, and I was 9 years old, and I believed, for a very long time, that I had somehow been forgotten on purpose. That I had cost him everything, and he had been taken away from the shame of ever having to look at what his kindness had earned him. Imogen, the voice, when it came, was barely a voice at all. I knew, she said. I want you to understand that I knew. Your Grace, I have known since the 3rd week, since the night you told me about the fox weather vane and something in the way you said the word. Before, went straight through me like a blade. I have sat behind that screen for 2 months, calling you Mr. Vane, knowing full well I was calling you Edmund. The screen did not move, but she heard, from behind it, a sound she had never once heard him make, small and broken, and entirely without its usual careful armor. Why, he managed finally, why in God's name would you not tell me? Because it was taken from me, Imogen said, and now her own voice was breaking too, and she let it. For the first time in 14 years, she simply let it. The choosing. When I was a girl, my mother would, she meant well, I believe she truly meant well, she would ask me to show my hand to visitors, to the vicar's wife, to anyone who called, so that they might see and pity us properly, and perhaps send a basket, or a little money, because we needed it badly, and she did what she thought she must. But every single time, Edmund, every single time, it was her choice, not mine. My scar became a performance I did not agree to give, and I promised myself, 9 years old, in a cold little room, with my hand wrapped in linen, and my whole chest full of a rage I did not yet have words for. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to give someone else that choice back, the choice of when and how, wine, whether, I would give it to them, even if it cost me, even if it meant sitting behind a screen for 2 months, aching to say your name and saying nothing at all. For a long moment, there was only the fire settling in the grate, and the rain that had started up again, softer now, against the glass. Then, slowly, so slowly she almost did not understand what was happening until it had already begun, the screen moved. He came around it himself. No one asked him to, no one pushed. He simply stood, at last, in the low lamplight, close enough that she could see him properly for the first time in her life since she was 9 years old, the scarring along his jaw and down the left side of his throat, old and pale and permanent, the eye that did not open quite as far as the other, the whole ruined, familiar, beloved geography of a face. she had carried in the dark corner of her memory for 14 years without once letting herself take it out and look at it. He was watching her the way a man watches a door he has been afraid to open, discovering, at last, that there was light on the other side of it the whole time. "Ned," she said, the old name, the child's name, the one she had not spoken aloud in 14 years, and he made a sound that was half his name and half something with no name at all, and crossed the last of the distance between them. They did not speak for a long while after. There did not seem to be a need. He held her scarred hand in both of his, turning it gently to the lamplight, as though it were something rare rather than something ruined, and she let him look at it, truly look, without flinching, without the polite, averted glance she had grown so used to receiving from everyone else in her life. And she understood, in that quiet, unhurried-looking, more forgiveness than 14 years of careful silence had ever managed to give her. "I believed you hated me," he said at last, so low she nearly missed it. "All this time, I believed that if you had lived, if you had ever thought of that day again, it could only be to curse my name for it. I never once cursed your name, Edmund. I have spent 14 years trying to remember the sound of it. And now you have it back." "Now I have it back," she agreed, and pressed his scarred hand, briefly, to her cheek. "And I find I have no intention of ever losing it again." His 30th birthday fell on a bright, hard morning, the kind that comes after a long rain has finally scoured a sky clean, and the drive up to Ashcombe was lined, for the first time in 5 years, with tenants who had come, not out of duty, but out of a curiosity that had, over the course of one strange and rumour-thick fortnight, quietly turned into hope. Aldous Vane stood near the front of the assembled crowd, in a coat too fine for the occasion, with 2 members of the trustee board flanking him, like men who had already begun composing their apologies. He did not look nervous. He looked, in fact, entirely satisfied with himself, the look of a man who has sheeted every possible outcome and found himself the winner, regardless of which one occurs. He had not counted on this outcome. Edmund Vane, Duke of Ashcombe, walked out onto the front steps of his own house at the appointed hour, in full daylight, before every soul who had come to see whether he would come at all, and beside him, her hand in his, without a glove on either hand between them, walked Imogen. There was a silence when they stopped at the top of the steps, the particular silence of several hundred people deciding, all at once, what they were about to feel. Imogen went first. She had asked to, the night before, in the study, with the fire low and his hand, his scarred, warm, entirely familiar hand, wrapped around hers. "Let me go first," she'd said. "Not because you need protecting, because I have spent 14 years wishing someone had simply stood beside me instead of asking me to stand alone." So she raised her bare right hand in front of 400 families and a solicitor wringing his hat and a cousin whose satisfied smile was already beginning, very slightly, to falter, and she did not explain it, and she did not apologize for it. She only let them see it, the old scar, pale in the bright morning light, and then she turned and looked at Edmund and nodded once. He lifted his chin. He did not flinch. He let the sun find every part of his face that he had kept from it for 5 long years, and for one endless moment, the whole assembled crowd of Ashcombe simply looked, really looked, the way people so rarely allow themselves to, at their duke. Someone near the back, an old tenant, a woman who had known him as a boy, who had once given him gingerbread from her own kitchen window, began, quietly, to cry. Not from horror, from something else entirely, from the particular grief and relief of watching a person come home to himself after a long, long absence. Mr. Fenwick, beside the trustees, cleared his throat and announced, in a voice gone thick, that the terms of the late Duke's will were satisfied in full. The heir had presented himself, publicly, unveiled, before the assembled tenantry and trustees, precisely as the codicil required, and the matter, Mr. Vane, was closed. Aldous Vane left before the applause had properly started. No one much minded. They were married in November, quietly, in the small stone church at the edge of the estate, and Imogen wore no gloves at all beneath her wedding sleeves, because there was, she had decided, nothing left in that particular hand that needed hiding from anyone ever again. Ashcombe changed, that winter and the ones after, not all at once. Old houses do not shed their long-held silences easily, but steadily, the way a room grows warm from a fire that is simply, patiently, kept lit. The painted screen, with its gold birds, was moved, eventually, out of the study altogether and into the front hall, where it stood not as a barrier anymore, but simply as a beautiful old thing, admired for what it was, rather than what it had once been asked to hide. Some mornings, at breakfast, Edmund would reach across the table for the jam, and Imogen would reach for the tea, and their hands, his scarred, hers scarred, both entirely bare in the plain daylight, would brush, briefly, without either of them remarking on it at all. It had taken them each 14 years, and one, to learn that the bravest thing a person can do is not to hide what the world once flinched from. It is simply to let someone see it, and stay. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If it found something in you, a door you've kept shut, a scar you've kept gloved, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what it made you feel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.